Welcome to the part two of the mini lecture on style. In the first part, we've examined the three major elements of style: clarity, emotion, and inclusion. Now we're going to examine, or in a future assignment, written assignment 7, you're going to be asked to look at a particular speech and analyze it for style. This is the Reagan Challenger speech given in 1986 after the Space Shuttle Challenger unfortunately exploded in space. And this is a speech, one of Ronald Reagan's more famous speeches, and voted as one of the top speeches in the 20th century. So remember, in this speech, we're looking for style, the word choices, not delivery and how they were said, but specifically the word choices that the speaker makes. Again, we're looking for clarity, inclusion, or emotion. So I'm asking you to examine this particular speech, define the word style, and pick out clarity, inclusion, and emotion in the speech. So tell me, here's an example where I thought the president had clear and accurate language. Here is an area where I thought he was vivid and descriptive. In terms of emotion, how did he arouse? What particular word choices did he use to arouse emotion in his audience? Was he inclusive? Was there we and us language throughout the speech? And so you'll need to examine the speech in terms of style. We do often, again, a great example of style. And as I said before, sometimes we tend to value delivery over style. Now, this speech happens to be an example of both, but I think a particularly good example of what good style can do for us. Now, there are some specific rhetorical devices that we can use to help in aiding in good style. One of which we talked about is just using more simple and familiar language. But other ways we can use devices like repetition. Repetition, if you have ever read Martin Luther King's speech, I Have a Dream, or even if you haven't, you probably know one thing about it, that he has a dream. And we know this because he's repeated it again and again. Repetition helps the audience to remember. And as a speaker, one of the things we want them to take away are our major thoughts. And sometimes stylistic devices like repetition can help that. Alliteration is another form of repetition. It's the repetition of sounds that are near one another. The sweet smell of success, a dime a dozen, jump for joy. Onomatopoeia, I like to say that word, is mimicking the sounds that exist naturally in nature. The fly buzzed past. Sounds like the fly's wings. I like one from old campy TV history, the old Batman TV series in the 1960s. Whenever the Batman is getting ready to whack the Joker, you see kerpow, and it mimics the sound they would make if he was actually whacking him. So onomatopoeia is another one. Metaphor is another stylistic device, and it's very complicated, and we're only going to touch on it briefly. We could spend a whole semester just talking about metaphor. Is another stylistic device. We're going to look at metaphor and repetition in another assignment related to style, where I ask you to view a speech by the Reverend Jesse Jackson and pick out areas where he employed metaphor and repetition. But let's get back to the definition of metaphor. We know that the standard definition is the comparison of two objects without using the word like or as. And simile is just the opposite, where we use like or as for comparison. But the key point here is comparison, and we're trying to come up with meaning when comparing two objects or two thoughts. Oftentimes it's a known to an unknown. Now, metaphor used to be viewed as trickery, as deceit, as flowery language, not really good style. Now, of course, that has changed, and the more modern view is that it's very much legitimately stylistic, and it can aid a speaker in producing clarity and emotion and inclusion. Metaphor, if we think about it, can change the way that we look at something. I take, for example, sports. I'm a big sports fan. How do we tend to view sports? We tend to view sports through the metaphor of war. He sacked him, he blitzed him, he destroyed him. What if we were to change that language, that way that we describe the game, and we talked about it in the metaphor of dance? Well, that certainly changes our interpretation of the event. We look at it not in terms of the violence of the sport, but in terms of the athleticism and the beauty and the grace that is sport. So metaphor and the way that we describe the event changes our outlook. Metaphor, you could say, tends to highlight some things while obscuring other things. Um, Metaphor also performs an argumentative function. It goes beyond description and can argue. Imagine if you were in Nazi Germany in the 1940s and you bought into Hitler's infestation metaphor that Jews are parasites. This prescribes a particular action. What do you want to do to a parasite? You want to kill it. No further argument is necessary. So, rhetorical devices such as metaphor help the speaker to increase clarity, to foster inclusion, and arouse emotion. So, today we've looked at some elements of style, and we've talked about the three main things that good style does for us. In our next speech, we're going to turn from the word choices to the way that the words are said, and we are going to look at aspects of delivery. See you then.